RN, your world unfolding. You'll glow. You'll blossom. Those hormones will make you feel fabulous. There's no shortage of advice too about how to do pregnancy and childbirth well. Try this on for size then. My next guest says, my pregnancies were adventures in vomit, discomfort, sleepless nights. I wet myself often. During my second pregnancy, I broke 2 kitchen chairs. As I entered my final trimester, people started turning away when I waddled past, perhaps in fear that I might burst and splatter them with pregnancy goo. When I finally had the baby, I was left rummaging through the wreckage of my former self like the victim of a cyclone. So let's have some real talk. No celebrity yummy mummies. On this show this morning, for acclaimed author and mother of two, she went back for a second time, Monica Dux.
Certainly did.
It was all a medium-level catastrophe. She tells it like it was for her in an extremely funny, very confronting book, Things I Didn't Expect When I Was Expecting. Monica Dux.
Oh, good morning.
So you enjoyed pregnancy then?
Oh, I loved it. I think, it was a medium-level catastrophe. You start planning a pregnancy and you think, oh, I'm going to have a baby and this is how it'll be. And all the, all the images we have today of pregnancy are really dominated by this idea of the glowing woman, and it's a wonderful time. And I imagined that the baby would grow in my tummy, down there, and the rest of me would be completely normal, except I'd be more sober.
The happy gestator.
Yeah.
Tell us about who this woman is.
The happy gestator, she jogs, she does Pilates, she eats really well, she looks fantastic in all those body-hugging clothes. I mean, you see it in celebrity magazines. One thing that really struck me when I was pregnant was pregnancy magazines, because they take the normal women's magazines one step further. You've got the same emaciated models, except they're pregnant and emaciated, but they're all smiling. And even when there are pictures in these magazines, you see a woman in labour, 10 steps to labour, and she's smiling. She's got this little grin on her face.
Waddle, waddle, grin, grin.
Yeah, and it sets up these really unrealistic expectations, because some women do really enjoy pregnancy and thrive in pregnancy. But I think for the majority of women, it's a very confronting time physically. And I think it always has been and it always will be. But we're not very honest about that today.
No, you felt more like an unwashed walrus rather than a voluptuous sex goddess.
I certainly probably looked more like an unwashed walrus. I made the mistake of getting my hair cut very short in my first pregnancy so I could look like Mia Farrow in Rosemary's Baby, and it didn't end well.
So this is interesting. On the one hand, we have, as you point out, the sort of happy gestator, yummy mummy, happy and feeling gorgeous during her pregnancy. On the other hand, we also have a situation where there's a lot of pregnancy alarm and anxiety. Tell us about that tension, because it seems antithetical.
Well, I actually think they're related, because I think they're all about control. And that kind of yummy mummy and happy gestator idea is that you can control your pregnancy and you can look fantastic, and you just need to do all the right things and it'll come out okay. Your body won't grow too much and you'll be able to control everything that happens. And I think this whole risk culture that we're really bombarded with today also feeds into this idea of control, that, you should avoid just about everything. I mean, every week there's a new report about something that could somehow harm your fetus, and usually this stuff is purely speculative. But I think pregnant women today have a real hyper awareness of risk, and it is about that if you avoid all these things, you will control your pregnancy. You will have a very wonderful baby at the end of it. You can control your labour. You can control how you look and how you feel. You can lose your body weight, and that's all a crock. And I think the risk culture is quite insidious and very troubling, because a lot of the studies where they talk about things that can harm your fetus are not evidence-based. You can't experiment on a pregnant woman anymore. And we know that, there are certain things that definitely do impact on a fetus. But so many of the things that pregnant women are told to avoid are quite speculative. And it really breeds this sense of pressure and this...
Did you feel that pressure?
Yeah, I did. I mean,
you got quite anxious, didn't you? In fact,
I was crazy.
You got anxious about everything. You got anxious about poo.
I was opening my doors with elbows and just, so that I didn't pick up germs. I don't think I'm that abnormal. I think, and this was when I started I wanted to write this book. I wanted to write a funny book about all these absurd things that happen.
Darkly so.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk about what happens to your body in a way that so much of the stuff that you read is all dressed up in euphemism. But I found that I spoke to a lot of women, and so many women agreed with me. I mean, like the poo thing, I had a poo fear.
Well, you had a major poo fear.
I had a major poo
You really
fear.
thought you were going to poo during birth.
Well, and it's physiologically kind of your destiny in some ways.
Some women do.
Some women do. I did on my second. I didn't put that in the book. That could have been a postscript. And actually, when I was birthing, I birthed my second in a water, and I was screaming out, "Oh my God, I'm doing a poo!" And I don't think the midwives understood how.
Well, the whole anxiety stemmed from a few things, but one of them was that part of the kind of birthing kit that you'd been told to have if you were doing a water birth was a sieve.
Yeah, included a sieve. And I had asked innocently, what is a sieve for? And then I thought, oh, there's a Jaquito in the water. That's what you have to whisk it out. My issue with the poo, though, and I think I had a problem with the idea that if I was going to do a poo, no one would recognise that was a big deal for me. And often when women end up in labour, they don't care. And I know that was the case, for a lot of women, that you don't care by the time you get there. But everyone I spoke to, like midwives and obstetricians and I would say I'm very uncomfortable with doing this poo in front of an audience, and they may be videotaping it. And I was constantly told, oh, don't be silly. We just wipe it away. You're uptight. And I think a lot of what happens to women when they're pregnant in so many different ways with their body, that we lose our dignity, but we're not told that that's what's happening. We're told to just brush it away and gloss over it.
Well,
and
there's
not
a reason
it.
for that though, Monica, and that is that women wouldn't want to have babies.
Well, I think they
Surely
would.
there's a sort of sheen that, and you've, by the end of the book, despite all the gory detail, you too have reached a point where you gloss over it all.
I do. I now do it. Friends of mine, when they have newborns, I think, oh, it's so lovely. But in the first year after I had my son, I would see women with newborns and I would feel so much sadness, because I would think, oh, it's so hard. It's so hard. I think it is important that we talk about this stuff, because I think we set up unrealistic expectations, and women today, and mothers more than any other time, I think, feel so much guilt and so much angst about the experience. And I don't think we do go into motherhood as prepared as we could. And I didn't want to write a book that was, ooh, look what will happen. Your innards will fall out.
But you have.
I have. Well,
You do describe people's innards falling out.
They were my innards.
You had anxiety about your innards falling out when you looked down there.
I looked down there, and public health
pregnancy.
warning: do not look down there.
Well, you were told, don't look down there, don't look at your vagina after birth for some weeks. And you did.
I rushed out. I felt good for a moment. I thought, oh, I'm sure.
But it was a different terrain down there.
It was the elephant vagina.
The elephant vagina. Well, I mean, one partner, I think, described it as a scene from Belfast.
Yeah, that was a very funny line. A woman told me her husband had said it looked like Belfast. I think... I thought it looked like a deep sea creature that had been dredged up from an oceanic trench. That was how I actually envisaged it. But you know what? Once again, the issue I had with that was I couldn't find anyone who would say, yes, that's normal, and don't be afraid, and your body has changed. I mean, we live, particularly women today, we live in our bodies so all completely. We are constantly aware of our weight and how we look and we present ourselves. And I think when you get pregnant, you change so fundamentally. And to be told that this rapid and fundamental change is something you should just be comfortable with isn't going to work. It doesn't work that way. We end up feeling guilty. I mean, the weight issue is a big deal too for a lot of pregnant women today, where we're all meant to fall into these charts. And it doesn't work like that, because it isn't just a baby growing in your thorax. It's like your whole, you get extra blood volume. Your hair doesn't fall out. Your nails grow differently. Your feet size, the shoe size changes. There's all these really quite profound changes. And I think it's like we want to gloss over. And I think ultimately what we're doing is glossing over the hard work of making babies.
So you'd come from a family of breeders. There was great Aunt Hilda, 18 children.
Yeah, but I mean,
you should have been fully equipped.
Oh, that was a long while ago. But yeah, my family tree, you look back and some of them, and yeah, the 18 children one was, and there was a photo of a relative, and she looked so tired. And, when I realised it was, the idea that women used to birth so many babies. I mean, I think that's part of the problem, that we live in a time where we've got so much better healthcare today, and babies do, usually have very good outcomes. Women don't die the way they used to, although they still can. And it set up this false sense of control in terms of, I think, the actual experience itself.
Well, there's the actual pregnancy. It got pretty bad for you, didn't it?
Yeah, I got very sick, and that was actually one other motivation for me to write the book. Was I had terrible morning sickness in inverted commas. I've got to stop calling it morning sickness.
24-hour sickness.
24 hour. The technical term is nausea and vomiting in pregnancy, but I think it needs something a bit more shocking. And I was laid up for months, and what I found so confronting about that was that everyone congratulated me. I was really sick. I couldn't, particularly when I was pregnant with my second child, I had a toddler to take care of and I couldn't look after him. I was, vomiting all the time. I felt so awful. And I would tell people this, I had to pull out of jobs I was doing, and you'd get this, that's fantastic. And I thought, what other situation in life when someone is so debilitated by something, would we just congratulate them? And I've seen this with
you've got
other
time
women.
off.
Yeah, I know. Well, my husband actually,
he
poor
said
man.
that.
Yeah, he said, I'd love to watch DVDs on the couch for months. And luckily we came back from that. We did come back from that, but it took a bit of work.
And then there's actually once the baby arrives, and this you deconstruct as well, and mothers groups.
Yeah, mothers groups are fascinating.
Real tension for you. You didn't have a good time at all.
Well, I wasn't invited, and that fed into my
was
paranoia.
the big.
I thought maybe the maternal health nurse had picked up on something about me. I didn't get the letter where I was meant to go to the mothers group, and when I started researching the book, I spoke to a lot of women about their experiences, and it really struck me that you had these two extremes. You had women who would say, I loved mine so much. One woman actually said, I think I love my mother's group more than I love my partner. And there was a lot of that love and support, and they'd gone on for years, these mothers groups. And on the other extreme, you had people who said they just terrorised me. But what was so interesting about...
Terrorised?
Yeah, that these women felt judged and traumatised, but some of these women had kept going. They'd kept going for years to these groups.
Masochism.
Yeah.
Social masochism, I think you describe it as.
Well, that's what I started off thinking, why are we persisting with this? And I think that when you become a mother, you do kind of become a walking cliche, and you suddenly get all this baggage of what you're now meant to be, and it's very hard to figure that out. And I think that goes back to that idea that we don't really acknowledge the enormity of it. We say, oh, it's wonderful. Think of the love, and isn't this magnificent? We congratulate women. We don't think this is an enormous job, and it's an enormous life change, and it's an enormous physical change.
Monica Dux is with me this morning on Life Matters. Things I didn't expect when I was expecting a book full of dark humour, and it's absolutely terrifying to read, but well worth reading, I have to say. Now, the pregnancies and becoming a mother challenged some of the assumptions you'd made as a feminist about embracing your body, about disentangling your identity from your body, which you'd done a lot of work on.
Yeah.
So tell us about that tension, because I was also interested in this book to see that at times you kind of apologise to your feminist compatriots.
Oh, look, I mean, it's interesting. My first book I co-authored was on feminism, and the motivation for me to write about feminism in my early 30s was having a baby, because I'd always been a feminist and I'd studied feminism and all of that. But when I got pregnant and I was very sick, and when my body started changing, I was suddenly struck with, well, I am vulnerable, and this has turned me into something. I am suddenly a woman, and I'd spent so many years of my life, my adult life, thinking I'm just the same as men. I can do everything a man can do. But I think once you get pregnant, you realise everything changes. You are vulnerable, and your body does in many ways define you, and you can't wipe over that. I was the one who was having to do all the hard work.
Capable and vulnerable, though, a duality there.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of power, I guess, that comes from being a mother, but I think sometimes we're sold that as a bit of a, oh, look, you're mother. But, being a mother is really hard work, and particularly when the baby's small. And it's a very strange and unique form of labour, because it does seem, and I think most women who get pregnant, you think, oh, how hard can it be? I'll just feed the baby and it'll sleep, and, maybe it'll occasionally cry. But that's not what the experience is. So, and feminism's interesting because there is a real tension, and always has been, within feminism about how to fit mothers in. And I think that's not just a feminist issue. How do we fit mothers into the broader world. I think we still haven't figured out how to fit women when they become mothers into the workforce. I mean, we've got so far to go before we get anywhere near accommodating for women with children. And, and it was for me a real revelation being pregnant and thinking, well, I kind of am my body and I didn't want to be, but it did make me reassess.
What about Chris, your husband?
Oh, the lovely Chris.
You went back for a second go. Actually, you also talk about miscarriage, and that is part of this book. Your second child was a home birth.
Yeah.
He was hesitant.
Yeah, poor
Was
Chris.
there any room for negotiation here?
Oh, look, I think because he'd seen me labour the first time, it was that thing of, well, it was mine to do. I was the one who had to choose how I wanted to birth.
He was scared that he would be left actually having to deliver the baby, though, and he's prone to keeling over at the sight of blood.
He does. He can't stand medical procedures, and that was a bit of an issue. And he'd made the mistake. I think the first birth I had went well, and it was uncomplicated and straightforward. And when I was pregnant with my second child, he did kind of casually suggest, we'd done it so well the first time, maybe I'd want an elective Caesar, in this. And, that night I turned around and said, I think I want a home birth. But, I mean, for me, the home birth...
antithesis of an elective Caesar.
Which it wasn't. But it was a practical decision for me. I had two very good midwives. The birth centre where I'd birthed, which was down the road from where I live, had closed, and... I felt much more comfortable doing that. It was very challenging for him in some ways, but it's interesting. He looks back now and says that with the first birth, because he got me to the hospital and he had to be that gatekeeper, he felt like he had much more to do. I think with the home birth, because I was surrounded by a couple of midwives and they really took over, he did stand back at the end and think, what am I doing? I got him to build teepees over the birthing pool because they have to keep the water warm. So he practiced his teepee building and felt very important. I mean, that's an interesting one though too, I think, about whether men should be there when you birth. And I talk a bit about that in the book, which probably won't be very popular with some women.
Well, they are increasingly there. I mean, predominantly they are there now. This has been a massive shift.
You're not there. But it's interesting.
Men want to be there.
I don't think all men want to be there. I think men feel they have to be there, and I don't think all of them are equipped to be there. And I think it's heresy to say that today, but I do think some men just aren't suited to being there. And it's funny that we no longer, that's a non-negotiable. And it's such a unique instance in history. Throughout most cultures and history, men have never been there. It's only really been in the last couple of decades. I mean, 50 years ago it was considered perverse, and doctors used to say if you were there you would become a homosexual. That was...
Look, it's a warts and all. It's a ripper, I tell you what. And I'm impressed that you went back for a second time.
Yeah. I sometimes think about a third. But...
You're going to terrify people.
Yeah. I wanted to laugh at it because I think that, I guess for me ultimately it's a big deal having a baby, and that's it, and I wanted to talk about the big deal part of it.
And you do, and very, it's a hoot actually. I was
thanks, Natasha.
Sort of screaming and laughing all at the same time. Monica Dux, thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
Things I Didn't Expect When I Was Expecting, published by Melbourne University Press, and we'll pop the details on the Life Matters website.